Can you cook? That was the question. Not a greeting. Not a welcome. Just that. Shouted loud enough for half the platform at Cheyenne Station to hear, on a gray October afternoon in 1884. Mercy Calloway stood there in her traveling dress, still gray with soot from 3 days on the Union Pacific, and every eye on that platform turned to her. Somewhere behind her, a porter dropped a trunk. Somewhere ahead, a dog barked at the hiss of the engine settling. And the man who'd asked the question, tall, sunburned, a rancher's hands wrapped around the brim of his hat, wasn't smiling. She would remember, later, that it wasn't cruelty in his eyes. It was something closer to fear. "I beg your pardon," she said. "Can you cook?" Jedediah Cole said again, quieter now, like the words cost him something. "Because the last woman who stood where you're standing could not. And she is not standing anywhere anymore." The crowd went still enough to hear the telegraph key clicking inside the station house. Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, was 7 years old as a city and already calling itself the Magic City of the Plains. Cattle Money had built its brick storefronts. The Union Pacific had built the rest. A matrimonial newspaper out of Kansas City had printed Jedediah Cole's advertisement 6 months prior. A widower, 31, 400 head of cattle, seeking a Christian woman of sound character, no children objected to. Mercy had answered it because her father's debts in Ohio had left her with 2 choices: a poorhouse or a train ticket west. She had not expected, in the advertisement's careful language, any mention of a first wife's fate. "She died of prairie fever," Jedediah said flatly, loading her trunk onto the wagon himself, refusing the help of the station boy. "Last winter. That's all there is to say about it." But that was not all there was to say about it. Mercy had heard it already, twice, in the 10 minutes since she'd stepped off the train. Once from the station master's wife, who'd gone quiet and pale at the mention of Cole's name, and once from an old cattleman spitting tobacco near the water tower, who'd muttered that Ada Cole's grave up at the churchyard had been dug into twice since spring, and neither time by her husband. Dug into, Mercy repeated to herself, climbing up onto the wagon seat beside a man she had married that morning by proxy, and now knew nothing about it all. The Cole Ranch sat 11 miles north of town, a good half-day's ride along the wagon road that cattlemen had cut through the shortgrass a decade before. Jedediah spoke little on the way. What he did say was practical. The well was good. The smokehouse needed repair before winter. The nearest neighbor was the Thorne family, 4 miles east. It was the name Thorne that made him go quiet in a different way. His jaw tightened. His hands pulled the reins half an inch tighter than they needed to. "Elias Thorne holds the note on this land," he said finally, as if forcing the words out. "My father borrowed against it in a hard year. I've been paying it since I was 19. Ada helped me keep the books straight. She was good with numbers, better than me, and now I can't find the ledger," Jedediah said. "And Thorne says the note comes due the first week of November, and if I can't produce 3 years of payment records, he means to take the land the courts will let him take." It was, Mercy realized, not a marriage he needed. It was a bookkeeper. She did not tell him, yet, that she had spent 4 years as a clerk in her father's dry goods store before it failed. That she could read a column of figures the way other women read scripture. Something told her to keep that particular fact to herself a while longer. The ranch house was modest but sound, cedar-shingled, with a cast-iron stove that had clearly not been properly blacked in months. In the yard stood a blacksmith's forge, cold, and beside it a young man named Silas, who worked the coal place for wages and said almost nothing except "ma'am" when Mercy passed. It was Silas who told her, on the second evening, while she was scrubbing the stove flue with sand and vinegar, that Ada Cole had not died in the house at all. "She went into town for the November mail," Silas said, not looking up from the horseshoe he was cooling in the water trough. "Never came home. Mr. Cole found her horse 3 days later, wandering loose by Horse Creek. Everybody said fever took her somewhere along the road and the wolves took the rest. But there weren't no bones ever found, and she'd drawn every dollar out of the Cheyenne bank the week before. $211, near her whole savings from selling eggs and butter these 6 years past. Mercy set down her rag. A woman does not draw out her savings before dying of fever on a familiar road. By the end of the week, Mercy had made herself useful in the one way she knew Jedediah could not refuse. She cooked, she mended, she kept the house, and in the evenings, under the excuse of tidying his desk, she went looking for the ledger herself. She found it on the 4th night, wedged behind a loose board in the pantry, not lost at all, but hidden, in Ada Cole's own careful hand, 3 years of payments to Elias Thorne, each one initialed, each one dated. And tucked into the back page, folded twice, a letter Ada had never sent. It named no lover, no scandal. It named numbers. Thorne's bank had been charging interest above the legal rate, allowed under territorial law. A practice Ada had documented month by month, meaning to take it before a judge in Cheyenne, once she'd gathered enough proof. Meaning to save the ranch not by paying a debt, but by proving the debt itself was built on fraud. She wasn't running from your marriage, Mercy said, laying the ledger before Jedediah at the kitchen table. She was running to town to file this, and someone did not want her to arrive. Jedediah went the color of old ash. Thorne, or someone working for him, Mercy said. A grave dug into twice, Jedediah. Someone was looking for something Ada might have buried instead of hidden. They didn't find it, because it was never in the ground at all. The truth came out 3 days later, in the Cheyenne land office, in front of a circuit judge who rode through twice a year and happened, by good fortune, to be riding through now. Elias Thorne's clerk, a nervous, sweating young man named Purdy, broke first, admitting under the judge's questioning that he had been paid to search the Cole property and the churchyard both, hunting Ada's proof, on Thorne's instruction, after Thorne had gotten word she meant to expose him. Ada Cole, it turned out, had not died at all. She had reached Cheyenne, frightened and certain someone meant her harm, and had taken the eastbound train under her maiden name, rather than risk the road home, meaning to return with a lawyer once she felt safe. A telegram to Omaha, sent that same afternoon, found her alive, boarding at a rooming house, waiting for a moment that had simply never come. She came home on the Friday train. She did not come home to her marriage. That, Mercy understood without needing to be told, had already quietly ended in all the ways that mattered, long before the fever story was ever whispered. But she came home to see her name cleared, and Thorne's illegal notes voided by the judge's order, the ranch's debt cut by more than half. Jedediah Cole stood on the same platform where he'd once asked a stranger whether she could cook, and he asked Mercy Calloway a different question now. "Why did you stay?" he said. "When I gave you every reason to get back on that train. Because you asked me a rude question." Mercy said, "But I saw the truth underneath it. You weren't asking about biscuits. You were asking whether I could be trusted with something broken." He had no answer for that. He only nodded and helped her down from the wagon. The way a man helps someone he has finally decided is worth keeping. Ada Cole never returned to the ranch. She took a position keeping books for the Union Pacific's Cheyenne office, work she was better suited to than marriage had ever been, and sent a letter each Christmas that Jedediah kept, unopened at first, then read, then answered. There is a kind of frontier justice that never touches a courtroom, the slow, quiet correcting of a wrong, one honest ledger page at a time. Mercy Calloway learned that lesson standing in a pantry with a hidden book of numbers, and she never forgot it. Every story from the Old West carries a little of that truth, that the real crimes were rarely the ones the neighbors gossiped about, and the real courage was rarely loud. Thank you for riding along on this one. Until next time, keep exploring the stories history almost forgot.